want to try this out and make sure that everything works before I say, hey, this is the, this is what you need to do. Because I'm by no means an expert. This is my first time tearing one of these apart. I'm basically just going by the seat of my pants and, doing what feels right and going from there. Okay, first step is to install the axle. The easiest way to do it, I think, is just to sit on the ground, hold it up with your knees, your legs. And I have these adjustments backed all the way out. There's a side-to-side adjustment here and here. I have them backed out just so I can get the axle in nice and easy. So we'll tighten it up once we get to that point. I put a little rubber boot on this side to help keep grease from dropping out the back end there when we grease it. Just something I had laying around. Okay, it's roughly in there now. I'm going to go ahead and hand tighten as evenly as possible these guys here. Okay, so now we don't have a lot of play forward and back, maybe a little. Yeah, it's touching them now though, so it can't go too much further than that. So if you're going to dial this thing in, make sure that the axle doesn't shift like that. So I just have those hand tightened there so the axle's pretty sturdy. It's not going to go anywhere. And we'll start with this side, install the cylinder connections, the spindle, and arm over there. So you can see I've marked the cylinder with the center to center distance here once I got these adjustments dialed in. So on mine it's 19.5 inches from center pin to center pin with the cylinder extended. Right now it's retracted. We're going to get some new hardware. Here on the top we're going to use a real thick washer and a backup washer, and then I've got a bolt with a serrated flange to help hold it in place. And I've marked the orientation of the splines on the spindle to the arm. The spindle is not keyed, so you can really put this arm that connects to the cylinder in any place you want. The manual states that it needs to be either at 0 degrees to the arm here, or 6 degrees ahead. And 6 degrees ahead is where I found mine was happiest. So if you look, now you can see that that's just a little offset from being in line with this spindle. Oh, and there's an additional washer that I'm putting down here. It's a thrust washer, some kind of coating. I can't remember what it is. If anybody is curious about what I've used, let me know and I'll shoot you some links. I'm not going to post them right now because I want to try this out and make sure that everything works before I say, hey, this is the, this is what you need to do. Because I'm by no means an expert. This is my first time tearing one of these apart. I'm basically just going by the seat of my pants and, doing what feels right and going from there. So right now the cylinder is all the way retracted, which means all the way back that way, and that will pull this arm all the way like this and steer the tractor that way. We can install it in this location, so we'll just leave the cylinder there. Here's one of the custom bolts I made. I had to grind down the head to get it to clear on the frame here when the axle pivots so it doesn't rub. right here. And I had to add a little bit of thread to the shoulder here. The reason that I went with a new bolt is that the original bolts were completely chewed up right in here where it touches the tie rod end. And I wanted something with the shoulder because the shoulder is actually the proper diameter to fit nice and snug in one of those joints, whereas the threaded portion has some material removed, which allows it to move over time and chew it up. So I went with a shoulder bolt. And, oh yeah, this one gets a little spacer underneath the tie rod end. So you can see I've got new links on this end here. And there's a new one, and you see that? Yeah, you can see that these are identical. This one has a custom bolt in it too, and I'll show you here in a minute. Pretty much the same deal. I just didn't have to change the head of this one. And these are kind of nice because they're a flanged head bolt, so they have a little bit more grab on the outside. And it doesn't look like it affects the misalignment angle that this is allowed to travel at. I don't think that this one... I cycled the steering back and forth and moved the pivot back and forth, and I don't think that the extra flange on the bolt is going to be enough to compromise the movement of any of these two joints here. So I've got that there, and then I'm going to run an additional nylock on the bottom of this, just as an extra precaution. So I'm going to grab my wrench and I'll tighten this down. 3/4, 16. Alright, it's tight. And we'll tighten this one up. Okay. And now you can see there is very little play in this, and it has no grease in it right now either. So it'll get even a little bit tighter than that when we've got grease in it. One of the things that was a little difficult is once I added that thrust washer to the bottom, I had to make sure there was enough clearance so that this arm, when it comes clamped down right here, doesn't bind against this surface. So you want just a little bit of play, but not a bunch. This one here, same deal here. Now this tractor came with 2 spacers behind this joint, and I looked at the parts diagram and it shows only 1, but maybe someone added one at another point in time. I'm not sure. I don't think it makes much of a difference, honestly. Hopefully tighten everything up. All right, so yeah, over here, another custom bolt. You can see that's got a full shoulder right here where it goes through the joint, which is what I wanted. There it goes. Yeah, so now you can see that shoulder right there. And just for additional reference, this is the bolt that it was replacing. So you can see very clearly where the tie rod end had chewed into that bolt. So that's what I'm trying to avoid by using one of these. So that took some fiddling and messing around, cutting threads, and made me realize that I really want to have a lathe for doing that kind of work, because I was not a happy camper trying to add a couple threads to a bolt like that. It's by hand. I don't mind tapping. It's just the shoulder on that bolt's actually a larger diameter than my die wanted to cut. So I had to grind it down by hand a little bit, which was really janky, but I got it. So it's in there for now. Alright, so everything's snugged up here. I'll come back around and do a final snug on everything. Tighten up this nylock on the bottom here before I forget it. Alright, now we got a lot of air in the system. You can see how spongy everything is. But one of the things I wanted to check before I got any further was to make sure that when this axle is bottomed out that that bolt doesn't graze the frame as it comes through there. So, and it doesn't, so we're good. So, let's center it. About there is about center. And we'll put the link on for that side. So I have these marked left hand and right hand. So we're going to be doing the left hand one. Let's loosen this back up so that that clamp will do its job. Tighten this first. I've added a lock washer here and a regular washer on the other side. This bolt here was all chewed up from not having any support where it was being tightened down. So okay, the lock washer, that's holding that on pretty good. I'll double check here. I'm sure it didn't drop. I think it dropped a little bit, so let's loosen that back up. Yeah, I think it dropped a little. So pull this up tight to where it needs to be. My 9/16 gear wrench is just, it's shot. I've used it so much for so many things, and it's just shot. It makes it hard to tell if I'm using it in the right direction because it ratchets in both directions sometimes. Okay, so that's all the way up. It's nice and tight there. Now we can tighten this down. Yeah, you can watch it move there. Maybe one more. Okay. We'll make sure this is extra good and tight. There. Alright, now, everything's nice and tight in there, no slop. So, let's install the left hand tie rod. And this is where all the geometry starts getting whacked. This is where you gotta start paying attention to things. So I've already gone through the process of making sure everything cleared and everything was able to travel as far as it needed to without hitting anything. So you got a real long bolt over here, right there, and then here, basically the same setup as the original, where it tightens in there. Now there's a tiny little bit of play. I'm going to leave these snugged for now so they don't move, but a final tightening is going to have to happen before we get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll make sure everything lines up the way it did a couple days ago. So that's in there. I'll tighten up this 3/8 bolt in here. Okay, that's not going anywhere. Now we'll go to the other side. Do the same thing over here. And then we'll install the spindle on this side. Yeah, it's time for a new 9/16 gear wrench. That thing is just, it's driving me nuts. And here's the spindle for this side. This got new hardware too. Here's the new thrust washer. New hardware. This one is not serrated. And basically this is just a down travel stop to make sure the axle doesn't, or the spindle doesn't fall out of the axle. So And some additional washers there just to keep everything together. And this is the one with the extra stop that I welded on. So I guess, you know, technically I've lost a little bit of steering travel, but not much. Again, nice and tight, but not sloppy. And it'll get nice once there's some grease in there, it'll be nice. Using the factory castle nut and lock washer here. There's nothing wrong with them, so. Okay. There. That's snugged up. We'll do a final retorque of everything once we're happy with it. So my right hand length from center to center is 10.5 inches. And my left hand length from center to center is 10 3/4. What that means is, so with this thing pointed straight ahead, if you look here, there's a slight bit of an offset to that bell crank. And I did that to make sure that I had the proper amount of travel without anything colliding. So when I turn left, about out of fluid in that valve. So that's full lock to the left. You can see there's a gap right here. Cylinder is fully extended. This is the full travel of the cylinder. So the cylinder is what's stopping everything from traveling further. So there's a gap here. And on the opposite side, there's a little gap here. So nothing's hitting. And you can cycle the suspension that way and that way. And nothing hits. And I'll show you this with the wheels on too, because that's a part of the process too. And then when we go in the other direction, we're gonna run. Oh, there's so much air in that now. It's terrible. I don't know if it even won't stay. Yeah, it'll stay. So what you can see is that the cylinder hasn't gone fully retracted. So there's a tiny little bit left that it can travel. So if you look here, you've got a little bit of a gap so that this joint isn't hitting. And over here, a little bit of a gap right here. And you can see that, well, it actually needs to go a little bit further. So the stop is preventing this from hitting that. And it wouldn't hit it real hard, but the way that the geometry is set up on this thing, the cylinder doesn't go full stroke in this direction, so it's counting on something else from stopping it from hitting. And then we're also pretty well lined up side to side. You look down here, and I actually measured this. Let me show you where I measured from. To figure out if this was tracking straight to the frame, I measured from a solid point on the frame in both sides with the steering wheel centered. So about 25.5 to center over here. And about 25.5 to center over here. So we know we're tracking pretty parallel. And yeah, now we'll throw on the tires and I'll show you how everything looks put together. And I'll show you a couple other things that I had to be aware of when I put it back together. Alright, we got the tires on. This helps for a good visual, but there's also some places to check to make sure you got everything lined up right. Kind of helps you get things parallel because you can eyeball that parallel line right there between the frame and the wheel just to get the ballpark. And the same thing over here. You can eyeball that right there just to get it roughly in place. There's no interference on the opposite side, but on this side here, since you have the cylinder, when this steering system goes full lock the other way, no interference on the opposite side. But when you come back and you extend the cylinder and you pivot the axle, you get pretty close to this fitting right here. So what I did is I had the axle pivoted as much as it could pivot and held it in place. And then checked my arm here to see if I wanted it at the 0 degrees or the 6 degree mark. And the happy medium for me was setting it at the 6 degrees ahead of the spindle and then adjusting the travel in both directions to make it travel as equally in both directions as I could. Ideally, you would like it to travel a little more in this direction because this, if you're mowing, this would be your trimming side, right? This is the deck would be discharging on the opposite side, and you'd be going next to trees and stuff on this side, so you'd want a tighter turning radius in the left direction. But you're limited because the cylinder's on this side. You can only go so far. So I gave it, you know, 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch here. Got it as close as I could get it comfortably. And then adjusted the amount of travel back the other way by changing the length of the cylinder and then adding the stop on the opposite side. So just something to be mindful of. And now you can see, if you look down here, you can see when they're talking about the alignment of this arm to the spindle, you can see that this arm is clocked just slightly that way. That's that one spline movement to the left. The other way that the factory says is okay is like straight in line, which would be 0 degrees like this. So, it's pretty much back together. I'm going to tighten everything down, lube everything up, and then probably come in here, grease that universal joint right there, and the top of the shaft over there. Make sure everything's moving freely mechanically as it goes into the steering valve. And then, yeah, should be pretty much ready to go, which means we can start focusing on the wiring, which is everybody's favorite part of the Cyclops Cubs. Everybody loves the wiring. And then over there in the corner, that's the Mag 18, who's been waiting to go back in there. So the whole idea is to make sure we get as much of this done before we put the engine back in. So hopefully that helps you guys out. And let me know if you have any questions. If you want any idea about, you know, what components I used to put this thing back together, I'd be happy to share that with you. But like I said, I want to get some hours on this thing, and before I say this is, you know, that I agree with this fix. So anyway, it looks good from here, at least. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with some wiring.